Welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we're looking at this document called Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. It's kind of like a blueprint, like if a conservative president takes office in 2025, this is what they could do.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's not just like general ideas.
Yeah.
It gets into the specifics, like you wouldn't believe. All these different departments, all the agencies, potential policy changes.
Huh.
Even talks about moving around billions in funding.
So it's pretty in-depth.
It's a serious piece of work, yeah. And from the beginning, you can tell they really want to, what's the word, streamline the government.
Oh, yeah. I noticed that too. Like, that's kind of a theme throughout the whole thing, like how the federal government's gotten too big and all.
Right. Less efficient. They want to make it more focused.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So who are the people behind this roadmap?
So you've got Jennifer Hazelton. She's got a ton of experience, worked in government, been a journalist, the whole 9 yards.
Oh, wow.
Department of Defense,
Hmm.
USAID. She even worked for some of the big news networks.
So she's seen it all from the inside, huh?
Exactly. She knows how things work. And then there's Karen Kerrigan. She's been advocating for small businesses forever, like decades.
Small businesses, huh?
Yeah, she heads up the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, so she's been shaping policy, stuff that directly impacts entrepreneurs.
I see. So you've got these two very different backgrounds kind of coming together.
Yeah, an interesting mix. Definitely informs their recommendations. Now, one of the areas that really stood out to me, they talk about reshaping the whole federal government,
Uh-huh.
especially the Department of Homeland Security.
Oh, really? What do they want to do with that?
Get this, they want to split it into two separate departments. Can you imagine?
Whoa. That's a big change.
It is.
Why would they want to do that?
Their argument is Homeland Security as it is now, it's just too big, too much to handle. But they think by splitting it up, you get agencies that can actually focus and work better. You'll be more efficient.
Oh, so it goes back to that streamlining thing.
Right. Cut out the extra layers, all the bureaucracy.
Trying to save money, I bet.
That too. Taxpayer dollars and all that.
Yeah, makes sense.
But it's not just about being efficient, or saving money. It's also, they say, about making the government work better.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not just moving departments around. They want to actually reform the civil service itself, the people who work for the government.
Interesting.
And there's this story they tell about when the Carter administration abolished the PACE exam.
The PACE exam.
Yeah, it's like this general intelligence test.
Yeah.
They used it to hire civil servants,
Huh.
but they got rid of it.
What happened?
Well, according to this document, it basically lowered the bar for competence in government.
So people that weren't qualified were getting jobs.
Yeah. So they want to bring back some kind of assessment, to make sure that the people working these important jobs are actually, qualified.
Oh, so that's what they mean by accountability, huh?
Right.
Like raising the standards.
Yeah, exactly. Now, moving on a little bit, the document also talks a lot about family. And one of the things they propose is using, government power to support families, including tax stuff.
That sounds interesting.
It really gets at this conservative belief that strong families equal a healthy society.
I see.
So they have these proposals like getting rid of marriage penalties in welfare programs.
Marriage penalties? What are those?
Well, basically it means that if a couple gets married, they wouldn't lose their benefits just because they tied the knot.
Oh, okay.
And they also want to increase the child tax credit.
So putting more money directly to families.
Yeah, with kids.
That makes sense.
So, they're not just talking. They're actually trying to put policies in place that would help families.
Actions speak louder than words, I guess.
Right. Now, we can't talk about a potential conservative agenda without talking about immigration,
Right.
and border security.
It's definitely a hot topic.
This document is very clear. They want to crack down on illegal immigration.
Yeah.
Much stricter enforcement. One of the big things they recommend is that ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that they should use all the detention space that's available.
All of it.
Yeah, fully utilize it. And they want to limit those programs where migrants can live in the community while they're waiting for their hearings.
So there's less of that.
And really restrict parole, too.
Droll.
Yeah, where they let someone in temporarily for humanitarian reasons or whatever.
I see.
So basically, they're taking a much tougher stance than we've seen lately.
Definitely sending a message.
Yeah, trying to make it clear that they won't tolerate illegal immigration.
Yeah.
But that brings up a whole other can of worms, right?
Right.
What about the people who are fleeing violence? or persecution.
Right, the humanitarian side of things.
Yeah. And honestly, the document doesn't really address those concerns.
It doesn't.
Not directly.
Right.
But it definitely highlights just how divided the country is on immigration.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, how do you manage it all, border security and humanitarian issues? It's a tough one. Okay, so we've talked about streamlining the government, family policy, immigration. It's clear they want some big changes.
Yeah.
Domestically, but also in terms of foreign policy.
Yeah.
But before we go global, there's another big one, national defense. Like a cornerstone of conservative thought.
What do they say about that?
Oh, mandate for leadership makes it very clear. Strong military, that's a top priority.
Makes sense?
Increase defense spending, modernize the nuclear arsenal, strengthen those alliances, especially with China being such a big player now.
Oh, I can see why that would be a concern.
And get this, they want all students in federally funded schools to take the ASVAB.
The what?
The ASVAB, the military entrance exam.
Oh, wow.
Like make it mandatory for all high schoolers.
Seriously.
Yeah, that's a pretty big change.
I wonder what they're hoping to get out of that.
Maybe get more young people thinking about the military, broaden the pool of recruits.
Possibly.
Or maybe just make sure that everyone, no matter what they're going to do in life, has some basic understanding of the military, what it does, for national security.
That's interesting.
I can already see how controversial some of this stuff would be if they actually tried to do it. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, I bet.
There's so much more in this document.
We've got a lot more to unpack.
Energy, climate change, America's role in the world. This document lays it all out.
So it's a whole vision for the future,
Yeah, based on those conservative principles.
but it's also going to cause a lot of debate, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. This
Well-
is just the beginning.
We were talking about how controversial some of this stuff is.
Yeah.
Well, get ready because this next part is, let's just say it's going to raise some eyebrows. Energy and climate change.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
They're really pushing for American energy independence, but, well, they're kind of skeptical about some of the climate policies we have in place.
So what do they want to do about it?
Well, they want to change some of the agencies and programs, like big time, like the national labs.
The national labs. What do they want to do with those?
They want to move them away from some of those applied energy programs, like EAR.
EAR?
Yeah, the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, that one.
Oh, right, right.
They think EAR has kind of strayed from its original purpose.
I see.
They want them to go back to focusing on basic science, the fundamentals.
Interesting. So less applied stuff, more basic research.
Right, and it doesn't stop there. They even want to take another look at some of those big environmental laws, like the Global Change Research Act from 1990.
Whoa.
Yeah, they're basically questioning how much the federal government should be involved in environmental regulations.
Like balancing environmental stuff with the economy.
Exactly. It's a tough one,
It is.
but it's clear they want less regulation.
A lighter touch.
Right. And they're really into making environmental science more transparent.
Oh, yeah, I noticed that. Like making sure the data's solid and all.
Right. Reproducibility, they call it.
It's like they're saying, let's get the science right before we start making all these big policy changes.
Makes sense. Now, this next part is where it gets really interesting. Trade and China.
Oh, yeah. That's a hot button issue for sure.
They actually present two totally different viewpoints on this one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So they don't really take a side?
Well, it's more like they're giving you both sides of the argument and letting you decide.
So who are these two viewpoints from?
Well, one's from Peter Navarro. You remember him.
Yeah, he was pretty tough on China in the last administration.
Exactly. And then there's Philip Levy. He's more of a free trade guy.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so what do they say?
Well, Navarro's all about using trade policy as a weapon, basically,
Yeah.
to make American manufacturing stronger, and to push back against China's economic policies.
I see.
But Livy, he's warning against things like tariffs. He says they actually hurt American businesses and consumers in the end.
So it sounds like there's a real debate within the conservative movement about how to deal with China.
Absolutely. And the document doesn't really say which way to go. It's more like they're acknowledging how complicated this issue is.
Like there's no easy answer.
Right. You have to balance economic interests with national security.
You're kidding. That's a lot for whoever the next president is to think about. We've really only scratched the surface of this document.
Oh, yeah. There's a ton more in here.
Like, how do they actually plan on putting all these ideas into practice?
Well, one thing they get into is how they want to restructure these different departments and agencies.
Oh, yeah, they talked about that.
Mhm.
Streamlining, right?
Right, but they really get into the weeds, like suggesting which offices to get rid of, which programs are wasteful. They even talk about getting rid of entire programs.
Seriously?
Yeah, it's like they're taking a scalpel to the whole federal bureaucracy.
Whoa. So what's an example?
One that jumped out at me was their critique of USCIS.
USCIS, that's immigration stuff, right?
Right, it handles all the applications for citizenship, visas, all that.
Oh, right, right.
Well, they say USCIS has lost its way. They think it's become way too focused on expanding these temporary programs, like parole and stuff.
Hmm.
They want to go back to focusing on its original purpose, which
Mhm.
they say is screening applicants.
To make sure they're not a security risk.
Right. And protecting American interests. So they actually have specific suggestions for how to restructure the agency.
Like what?
They want to reclassify some of the leadership roles, especially in the Fraud Detection and National Security Directorate.
I see. So basically shifting the focus back to security.
Right. Less about being lenient, more about keeping the country safe.
So that's immigration. What about other parts of Homeland Security?
Well, they want to use all that detention space for people crossing the border illegally.
All of it.
Yeah. And really crack down on parole, really limit it,
Wow.
and cut way back on those alternative programs too, the ones that let people stay in the community.
Oh, right, right.
So they're really going all in on border security, trying to reduce illegal immigration by any means necessary.
That's a pretty tough stance.
It is. Now, FEMA, they're not too happy with them either.
FEMA. You mean the disaster relief people?
Yep. They think FEMA's trying to do too much.
Oh, really?
They say they're stepping in to make up for the fact that states and local governments aren't prepared enough for disasters.
I see.
So it goes back to that whole federalism thing we were talking about.
Right.
They want states and localities to take on more responsibility. Let FEMA handle the really big catastrophes.
So it's about rebalancing the relationship between the federal government and the states?
Exactly. And speaking of rebalancing power, they also want to change how the State Department handles treaties.
Treaties, huh? That's pretty wonky.
I know, right? But it's actually pretty important. They're really focused on giving the Senate more power in approving treaties.
Like they want to restore their constitutional role.
Right. They think the executive branch has had too much power over foreign policy lately.
So they want to rate them in a bit.
Yeah, they even talk about freezing all current treaty negotiations until the new president can figure out what his foreign policy goals are.
That's a pretty big deal.
It is. They even suggest not enforcing treaties that the Senate hasn't properly ratified.
Wow.
Yeah, that would be a huge shift. But it would definitely send a message that they're serious about giving Congress more say in foreign policy.
I could see that. Now, what about the intelligence community? The CIA, NSA, all those guys.
Yeah.
What do they want to do with them?
Well, they have two main goals. First, they want them to be more aggressive in dealing with our adversaries.
Adversaries like who?
The usual suspects, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. They want to make sure we're gathering enough intelligence on them and developing strategies to counter their influence.
Okay, so be more proactive.
Right. But they also want to streamline the intelligence community, make it more efficient, get rid of any redundancies.
Makes sense.
And they want to make sure the intelligence that the president gets is completely objective. Yeah, no political bias or anything like that. They're trying to address those concerns that the intelligence community has gotten too politicized lately.
Oh, right. Like people are worried they're not getting the straight story.
Exactly. They want to rebuild trust in the intelligence community, make sure it's serving the country, not any particular political party.
That's a big one.
It is. They also talk about expanding intelligence sharing with our allies.
Like who?
Well, they mentioned the Five Eyes network. That's the U.S., the U.K., Canada, Australia, and New Zealand.
Oh, right. I've heard of that.
They see that as a way to counter China's growing influence and strengthen those relationships with countries that share our values.
So it's all about building those alliances, those partnerships.
Yeah, it's a big part of their vision for America's role in the world.
I see. So it's not just about traditional security threats. They're also thinking about things like disinformation, promoting American values, things like that.
Exactly. And they have some pretty specific ideas about how to do that, like overhauling the U.S. Agency for Global Media.
The U.S. Agency for Global Media, that's the one that runs Voice of America, right?
Yeah, and Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, all those.
Oh, right, right. So what do they want to do with them?
Well, they basically think they need a major shakeup. They say there have been some security failures in the past and that they need to get back to their core mission,
Which is?
countering disinformation and promoting American values.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So they're responding to those criticisms that these agencies have become ineffective, even counterproductive.
Exactly. They want them to play a more active role in pushing back against propaganda and presenting a positive image of America to the world.
Makes sense. And USA, what about them?
USAID, well, they want them to focus more on things like healthcare and supporting families.
Oh, you're real.
Yeah, especially in places like the Middle East and Africa. They think that's a better way to build goodwill and make things more stable than just throwing money at problems.
So a more strategic approach to foreign aid.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Now, this next one, the Department of Health and Human Services, this is where it gets really interesting.
HHS. What do they want to do with them?
They want to completely reverse a lot of the policies that the current administration put in place.
Oh, wow. So big changes.
Huge, especially when it comes to abortion, transgender issues, and the CDC.
Yeah, those are definitely hot button issues.
You know, they're really advocating for a strong pro-life stance.
Like what specifically?
Well, they want to prevent Planned Parenthood from getting any Medicaid funding, and they want to reverse the approval of those chemical abortion drugs.
I see.
And they want to stop what they call junk gender science. They want to limit HHS from promoting transgender activism.
Yeah, those are definitely some of the most controversial proposals in the whole document.
They are, but they're clearly trying to appeal to a specific part of the electorate, you know, those who hold traditional values.
Right.
And they're not done yet. They're also critical of how the CDC handled the pandemic.
The CDC.
Yeah, they think they overreached.
That's not exactly a new criticism, is it?
Nope. A lot of people feel that way.
Yeah.
But the point is, they want more transparency and accountability from the CDC.
So it seems like they're really trying to tap into this feeling that a lot of Americans have, like they don't trust the government anymore.
Exactly. And it's not just about holding agencies accountable. It's also about giving individuals and communities more control over their own lives.
Like empowering people.
Exactly. And that's a theme we see throughout this document. Decentralizing power.
Like how?
Well, through federalism, promoting school choice, cutting regulations on businesses.
I see. So it's a very different vision of government than what we've seen lately.
It is. It's all about individual liberty and limited government.
It'll be interesting to see how these ideas play out in the next election. It's really interesting how this mandate for leadership document, it keeps coming back to this idea of empowering people, individuals, communities.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like taking power away from the federal government, letting people make their own choices.
You see it everywhere in this document. Education, agriculture, even energy. They really want to scale back those federal regulations, give more power to states and local communities.
Yeah, and one of the most radical examples, they actually talk about potentially getting rid of the Department of Education altogether.
Whoa, abolish it completely.
Yeah, no more Department of Education.
I can see where they're coming from, but wow, that's a huge change. What's the rationale behind that?
Well, they argue it's become too big, too bureaucratic, not really effective anymore. They say it's actually hurting innovation in education, and they think it's interfering with parents' rights to, decide what's best for their kids' education.
So what do they want to do instead?
Well, they suggest maybe giving some of the department's responsibilities to other agencies or just giving them back to the states.
So it's all about shrinking the federal government, giving more power back to the states. That seems to be a big theme for them.
Definitely. And they're also really big on school choice.
School choice, yeah.
Like they want to create these education savings accounts so parents could have more flexibility in how they use their education dollars.
Interesting. So basically giving parents more control, right?
Right. And creating more competition between schools. So they have to, improve to attract students.
Yeah, that makes sense. So education, that's a big one. What about agriculture? What do they say about that?
Oh, agriculture is another area where they want to see some major changes. They're not happy with how the current administration is handling things.
Like what specifically?
Well, they think there's too much focus on climate change and equity. They want to go back to the, more traditional priorities of supporting farmers and ranchers, making sure we have enough affordable food.
Back to basics?
Exactly. And they're really skeptical of all these efforts to, transform the food system.
Transform the food system?
Yeah, they think a lot of it is driven by ideology, not sound science.
I see.
They're more about letting the free market work its magic.
So less government intervention.
Right. And they want to reform some of the specific programs, too.
Like which ones?
Well, like the Conservation Reserve Program, the one that pays farmers to take land out of production.
Oh, right, for conservation purposes.
Yeah, they want more flexibility in that program.
Yeah.
And they also want to change how conservation easements work.
Conservation easements, those are the things that restrict how land can be used, right?
Sometimes permanently. They think those need to be looked at again, to make sure they're fair to landowners.
It's all about respecting property rights.
Right. And again, it comes back to that core idea of empowering individuals, reducing the role of government.
Got it. So agriculture, big changes there. What about energy? What's their take on that?
Well, they want to see the Department of Energy shift its focus back to basic scientific research.
So less about developing new technologies, more about pure science.
Right. And they're very critical of what they see as wasteful spending on things like renewable energy.
Oh, so they're not big fans of the push for green energy.
They're definitely more in favor of traditional energy sources like oil, natural gas, nuclear power.
I see. Less about climate change, more about energy independence.
Right. And they even talk about nuclear waste disposal, how to manage that better. They want to see more private sector involvement.
So looking for innovative solutions, outside the box thinking.
Exactly. And it's not just energy. They want to cut regulations across the board. EPA, FDA, HUD, you name it.
So a pretty sweeping deregulation agenda.
Yeah, they think all these regulations are strangling businesses, holding back the economy, without actually accomplishing much good.
The classic conservative argument.
Right. Less government is always better. They think the private sector can solve problems more efficiently. And they don't shy away from the really hot-button social issues either.
Like what?
Affirmative action, transgender policies in schools, even critical race theory.
Wow, those are some divisive topics.
No kidding. But they're laying out their vision, clear as day. They want to see a return to traditional values.
So this document is definitely trying to appeal to a specific segment of the population.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even if you don't agree with everything they say, it's a really interesting look at what a conservative future might look like.
Yeah, it's very thought-provoking. It really makes you think about the direction our country is headed.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground today.
We have a lot to digest.
But I think it's been a really valuable deep dive into mandate for leadership.
It has. It's given us a much clearer picture of this potential conservative agenda.
And it's raised some important questions, too. What are your biggest takeaways? What's sticking with you?
Well, I think what struck me most is how this document presents a very clear vision for the future, based on a specific set of principles.
Yeah.
It's definitely going to resonate with a lot of people. But it also raises some questions about how all of this would actually work in practice, and what the impact would be on different groups of people.
It really underscores how important it is to be informed, to participate in these debates, and to think critically about the choices we make as a society.
Absolutely. Because those choices have real consequences. And ultimately, we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
We did.
And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep learning, keep questioning, keep exploring these ideas.